We, and when I say we, I mean all Klal Yisrael, has just finished the Shiva for Maran Chaim Kanievsky Zeichat Kosh L'Bracha. And I think it's very interesting that it's really we. You could really feel a very unique atmosphere in Klal Yisrael that everybody, across all lines, everyone feels a tremendous loss of this Gavra Rabbah, this Gadol Ador, who everyone accepted as the Gadol Ador, and the tremendous feeling of loss. And it could be, I'm sure most people did not really, as we might call it, had a direct connection. Maybe never met Chaim. Over here, I had the opportunity to meet him once, got a bracha b'atzlacha, but it was a moment of a lifetime. But I'm sure most people didn't even have that opportunity. But everybody still feels a sense of loss, tremendous sense of loss. And everybody's going through, we're bereft. And so therefore, felt it was very important for all of us to get together and remember this tzaddik and try to get some glimpse into his godless, if that's at all possible, and what we've lost. Now, of course, there's maybe anyone could speak about Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky because his greatness and the stories and everything. But we're very fortunate in our community that, first of all, we're fortunate all together to have somebody like Rabbi Bondi, Skam Menahel at Or Eliyahu, who does so much for the community, whether in his very quiet way, a hidden jewel in our community. But this occurrence will maybe bring this to the forefront. I know when I heard the news, one of the first things I thought of is Rabbi Bondi, because Rabbi Bondi was in correspondence with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky for many years. I remember when he told me that, I said, wow, he really, now it's going on, he answered a lot of letters, but Rabbi Bondi was one of those people who corresponded with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. So I thought, right away, I said, oh, must be a tremendous loss for him. And I also thought, as the days went on, that he would be the perfect person to give us some type of glimpse into this great person. So, without further ado, it's really a kavod to present to the Kehillah of Rabbi Bondi.
Shus Rabbi Summers, Kol HaKol HaKadosh Hazeh. As Rabbi Summers just mentioned, we are still reeling from the loss of the Gadol Hador of Chaim Kanievsky. This evening is not a hesped. I don't think I'm right to give a hesped. And who could really give a hesped karoi on Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky? Zatzal. It's hard to say those words. What I would like to do is just to give divrei chizuk, maybe share some personal stories of what it means to me. After the Shiva, which was today, this morning, the children went to the kever, they said Kaddish. So I spent most of the day thinking a bit more about the loss. What comes to mind was this past week's parsha. It says, Vayidam Aaron HaKohen lost his two children, Nadav and Avihu. What was Aaron HaKohen's response? Vayidam Aaron was silent. Aaron was silent. Rashi says on that, Vayidam Aaron was silent, but he was Mikabel Schar. He got a reward because he was silent. What was the reward? Maschar Kiba. What was the word that he got? Shenisyachet imo hadibur, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a nevuah himself. It says, Vaydaber Hashem el Aaron Yayin v'shecher al tesht. You, Aaron, I'm commanding you with the nevuah that when Kohanim go to the Beis Hamikdash, they should not drink wine prior to them doing the avodah. That was the nevuah that Aaron HaKohen got as a schar for accepting HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decree of taking his two Gedolei Olam Tzadikim as children. The Ramban says on this that when was this nevuah given? The Ramban said it was not given the day that Nadav and Avihu died, because he was Shari B'tzar, he was in pain, he was an onen, and you can only get a nevuah if you're happy. Rather, it was the next day. It was the first day of Shiva. Just think about it for a moment. The ability for Aaron HaKohen, whether he was a human being, just lost his two children, the Gedolei Tzadikim Olav, but nevertheless, he was able to overcome that and not be B'tzar. He was B'simcha, and he got the nevuah. Not so simple. We see by Elisha, that didn't happen. Elisha, the Navi in Malachim, says as follows. He says, V'ata kichuli menagin. Bring me somebody that will cheer me up. He was upset that the Klal Yisrael was doing Averos. Elisha said, please bring me somebody that can cheer me up. I want the nevuah. Not so simple to get a nevuah. Nevertheless, Aaron HaKohen was able to do that. Aaron HaKohen was able to juggle these two feelings, being, so to say, in both worlds. It's a halo davar. It's something to think about. I connect this to Reb Chaim. Why? Because he lived in both worlds. He was a human being, but he was great. And I would like to tonight define a little bit of his greatness. He had that ability to be in two worlds at once. He passed away on Shushan Purim. Most of Eretz Yisrael, not most of Eretz Yisrael, but a lot of Eretz Yisrael, when they heard the news, they stopped their Purim Sudas, 3:30 in the afternoon. They stopped their Purim Sudas. He came to Eretz Yisrael, he left Eretz Yisrael from Poland, Purim. And he came, and he passed away on Shushan Purim. Tonight, it's really to describe a little bit of what we can and to get some chizuk. So I would first like to start off with what Chaim himself says in his sefer on the Torah, Time of the Krah. He says that we all know that there's two simanim for kosher animals that make them kosher. One is chewing their cud, and the second siman is that they have split hooves. Chaim Kanievsky says that it's no coincidence that one of them is chewing their cud. Why? Because chewing a cud, if an animal would have the human emotion of atzlus, or the human trait of atzlus, of being lazy, he would die. Because in order to chew your cud, you got to do something, you got to continuously do it. It's not so easy. The siman tahara of chewing your cud, why was that a siman tahara? Because it's coming to show you how we should live as people. That we shouldn't be outside, we should be zrizas. We should do things not just bezrizas. We should do it consistently. Don't be lazy. In the Reb Chaim's own words, the Sefer Orchas Yosher, which parenthetically was quoted throughout many, many, many elementary schools in Eretz Yisrael, because the number one question that was asked in most elementary schools this past week was that, I also want to be Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I also want to be that. How could I be that, Rabbi? Tell me, what's the secret? So Reb Chaim writes himself in Orchas Yosher. He says, what do you got to do? What's the trick? If there is such a thing? You got to learn bahasmada. You got to do things consistently. Hasmada means it's a word we use so often. What does hasmada mean? Be consistent. Be where you're supposed to be. Do what you're supposed to be. Make a commitment. Do your commitment. And then Reb Chaim continues, and it's very well known in yeshivas, whether it's elementary school, high school, yeshiva gedola, shaloah balei kishron. It's not the geniuses that will be matzliach. That's not where it all lies. Ela hamasmida, the people that do things consistently. And you know what? We know that he was consistent in whatever he did. Chazon Ish, Reb Chaim's uncle, passed away on Shabbos Kodesh, Tesvav Cheshvan, 1953. It was a very, very, very sad day for the Klal Yisrael, and Reb Chaim Zatzal already then had his Seder. His Seder was unbelievable and unique. There were people that tried doing that years ago, and they got physically sick because they couldn't do it. Imagine learning so much. The pressure was unbelievable, that you have to complete this. Unbelievable. The day the Chazon Ish died was Shabbos Kodesh was really, really hard. Reb Chaim writes this. It was really, really hard for him. He says, Ayef Shavar V'Ratzuv. He was totally exhausted. Then the next day was the Levaya. The Levaya was Sunday. And it was really, really hard for him. He says, Kimat, he didn't have koach to open up a Gemara. He had no time. He said he was so tzabrach, he was so broken. But he said, but I have a Seder. I have a Seder and I have to do it. And he pushed through and he pulled through. That's commitment. There are many pictures of him that people send me. I remember the picture happened years ago. He had a stroke in 2005. Remember the picture somebody sent me that he was at the hospital bed and he had all of his sfarm that he learned in the hospital bed. Kimat, he couldn't move his left side. He had trouble writing. He couldn't write. But he had a Seder, and that's something that was Kodesh Kodashim to him. The Talmud Agra, in his commentary, Siach Yitzchak, says, Shetargilenu b'sar sefa, that we should be margil ourselves in Divrei Torah. That doesn't sound like such a good thing. You should be margil yourself in Divrei Torah. You can be margil yourself. It'll come to you as just like another subject. Make sure that my Torah learning is behergel, that it's just something that I do without even thinking. What does that mean? Says the Talmud Agra, Ki nefesh ha-Yisraeli in Siach Yitzchak, Ki nefesh Yisraeli yesh be'etzem rotzim tshuka limod Torah. Every single nefesh Yisraeli has a tshuka to learn Torah. Rak ha-chisarn, what's the chisarn? Why is that it was so hard? Ma shemargil ba'atzmin ledvarm ha'fechim. Because we're margil ourselves to do things. We're used to doing something. We're used to doing things that are anti what our nefesh really wants. And therefore it's hard. The way to combat that is by doing something consistently. You got to keep on doing it, even if it's hard. And that's really if one could say a secret is consistency and hasmad. That's really where it was. He was a masmid atzim. He had something called chovos. Chovos are not that he owed people money, but he had this yoke that he owed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he needed himself, his nefesh needed to learn. That was something that was very, very unique about him. There's a sefer that Rabbi Chaim wrote in 1958, called Kiryas Melech. Kiryas Melech is Rabbi Chaim's not explanation, but when the Rambam writes his halachas, sometimes it's hard to find out where's the source in halacha, or in the Gemara, what the Rambam says. He wrote a whole sefer. Yaakov Kanievsky, I believe, when he saw the sefer Kiryas Melech, he said, this is a sefer of Kol HaTorah Kula. Everything's in it, because the Rambam wrote on everything in the Torah. Where's the source of the Rambam? So Reb Chaim painstakingly went through the whole Rambam, and he was able to go and give Mar Makomos. The Stipler in his Hakadama to the sefer says, Achim, lo uchal lihimana milahodia. I have to tell you something. Esa sheyadati ki pa'amim harbe Hetzia b'ni harava gon shlita. He's talking about Reb Chaim. Mekoros amiti v'nifla in the Piskei Rambam. I gave him mekoros that are true to the Rambam. Mekomos asher Rabosenu. No sekelev hinichol chalak. Where the other people that explained the Rambam, they didn't write where it was. Umishmaya kazachu legalos mekar mekomotar noveh shofem minus hatamidim. From where? Hatamudim beBavel Yerushalmi Tosefta Mechilta. V'yismach li bigamani. Stipler was saying that Shamayim he was zochet to it because he knew it. Talmud Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, Mechilta. He had tremendous siyata d'shmaya. He had chovos. He knew. He was able to do that. There's a story that I saw recently that in 2001, Reb Chaim had his first stroke. And I actually verified this story, as I'll share with you in a moment. And Reb Chaim was a lefty. He actually wrote a whole kuntras about kuntras iter yad. And he was a lefty. And he had a stroke, and his left side wasn't able to move. So he had a problem, right? He needed physical therapy. It's getting better, Baruch Hashem. So one of the first things that the physical therapist asked him was, please write on a piece of paper. We want to help you. Start using that. Start using the muscles. Chaim wrote, "Yikum porka min shemayim." that the salvation will come from Shemayim. And the nurse was astounded how, most people, when they write, after they get a stroke, what do they write? Their names. What's the pshat? Why he didn't write his name? He said, because it's a Gemara in Ksubis. Gemara Ksubis says, don't write your name on an empty piece of paper, on a blank piece of paper, because somebody might come and write on top of your name, I owe you $100,000, and then have, your name, Chaim Kanievsky. So he didn't want to write that, so he wrote, Yekum Purkim in Shemaya. He lived with Gemara. He lived with Torah. It wasn't just something that he learned, he lived it. How did I verify the story? Because I once, in one of my letters, I sent a check to Reb Chaim, made out to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, in my English, and on the back, he endorsed it, Be'ivrit. On the top of the check, I still have the check, it says Chaim Kanievsky, because he didn't want any space from the top of the check down, because it's against the Gemara in Ksubis. He lived what he knew, and he embraced it. I'm sure most people here heard about his brachas, astounding brachas. I heard there was a Maggid from Novardok, Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. Rabbi Galinsky and Chaim Kanievsky were very, very close. The Steipler himself learned in Novardok, and it's very well known that every single year, Rabbi Chaim used to finish Shas, Yerushalmi, Bavli, Sifra, Sifri, Medrash, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, including Mishnah Berurah, Kisvei Arizal, Kisvei Ramchal. He finished everything. Actually, it's interesting to know that he also finished Zohar, but the Zohar he didn't finish in Letterman Shul. It was a separate siyum upstairs. But at the siyum, every single year, Yaakov Galinsky saw that people were going to Reb Chaim after the siyum and asked Reb Chaim for brachas. And he turned to one person at the siyum and says, I don't understand, you're asking Reb Chaim for brachas. Reb Chaim's brachas aren't mekuyim. My brachas is mekuyim. So I looked at him and said, what does that mean? He says, because every single year after Reb Chaim finishes the siyum, I wish him Emirtz Hashem next year, and he says, V'chein Lamar. So my bracha to Reb Chaim is mekuyim. His bracha to me wasn't mekuyim. Why are you going to Reb Chaim? Rav Yaakov Galinsky was also the same one who wouldn't move without talking to Reb Chaim. But what is it about a bracha from a tzaddik? What is it? It's Kabbalah. He knew something that in Shemayim, if he says these words. Let me read to you what Reb Chaim himself writes. It says, V'yesh od inyan shemin Shemayim, from Shemayim nostin befiv, to a tzaddik, to somebody who was a Talmud Chacham Amiti, nostin befiv ma lomar. Hashem puts in his mouth what to say. V'afal pi she'enu yodea klal shezeh b'ruach HaKodesh. Chaim writes this. Could be he's talking about himself. Rak nostin lo machshava lomar kach v'kach lefi das Torah shebiyodo. V'mechavan lemes. Hashem puts things in his mouth. And he also says from the Chazon Ish as well. He says, "Kol osik bator lishmor and then mimenu eitzav v'soshia and zochel dvarim harbe." You say the zeruinu harbe pam eitzal gadolim. That when he says one thing to one person, it's mekuyim, but he says the opposite to another person, that's also mekuyim. People asked him for a bracha for a school for children. To one he says you should grow a beard. To the other one he says you should make havdalah on wine. What is that? How come? So they once asked Reb Chaim that question. So he didn't say this. He wouldn't say that about himself. But he says something that's very, very important. It's a hashkafa gedola. He says that part of a bracha when you come to a tzaddik is emunas chachamim. You have to have emunah that Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us leaders. And these leaders are able to give us hadracha. So when a Talmud Chacham gives you a bracha, that's emunas chachamim, and b'schus that it should be mekuyim. What did he used to say? Chaim used to say bracha v'atzlacha. You can think that's it, bracha v'atzlacha. So over Shabbos, I was having that discussion, and comes out that somebody reminded me that when Rabbi Kanievsky had her fatal heart attack on, I believe it was Shabbos Chol Hamoed Sukkos, around, I think it was 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, maybe more, I don't remember exactly. So the Hatzalah, the Chevra Hatzalah came to the house. What did Reb Chaim say to them? Bracha v'atzlacha. It wasn't a small thing to Reb Chaim. It meant something. He was honest. Reb Chaim had a Masorah from his great Rebbe, the Chazon Ish, and his father. I remember when I went to Reb Chaim Kanievsky the last time, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, so somebody warned me to take off my watch. Why? He said because, according to, the shmuel was that Reb Chaim said that a watch is beged isha, and a man should not wear something that's specially made for ladies to wear. So I didn't. A number of months after I went to Reb Chaim, I saw the following piece. Somebody asked Reb Chaim, I just want to ask, the Rav a question. It says, your father-in-law, Rabbi Yashiv, wore a watch. You yourself, when you were Bachar, wore a watch. There are many Gedolim that Shabina Rav wore a watch. How can you say it's Beged Isha? So he says, I hear your questions, great questions, but the Chazon Ish said it's a Beged Isha, there's no questions asked. That's what my Rabbi said, no questions asked. He was a man of Masorah. In Eretz Yisrael, the Chazon Ish was very particular in Eretz Yisrael not to use light from the Israeli public generator, from the electricity from the Israeli generators. Why? Because it would be a problem if you use that electricity and there are people that were Jews working on that electricity on Shabbos, you're then Ma'aseh Shabbos. So therefore they came out that they had electric generators that worked on their own, pre-programmed it, Shabbos, no problem. So most cities have that. Therefore, you can use electricity on Shabbos, except in one house, 23 Rehov Rashbam in Bnei Brak by Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He refused to use electricity even if it came from a generator. They asked him why. He said, because that's what the Chazon Ish did. So the Chazon Ish had a gas lamp. I have a gas lamp. Why did he have a gas lamp if there was still a generator? Because there should be one house in Eretz Yisrael that still does that minute, just to understand why we have this. So people should know, yeah, there is such a thing called a generator. Oh, it's because people are working on Shabbos and we can't do that. Therefore have the gas lamp. There's a Masorah. There's a Mechaber Sfarim on certain areas in Halacha that were closed. You can ask why. He wrote a sefer as a bacher, still when the Chazon Ish was still alive, called Nachal Eisan. It's a fabulous sefer, all about Hilchas Egla Arufa, when you find a dead body on the road and there's two cities, and you don't know which city the murderer came from. So there's halachas, you have to bring an Egla Arufa. So he wrote an entire sefer on it. There's large print on the top and very small print on the bottom. Almost Kol HaTorah Kula is there. Why did he write such a sefer? Why? So he writes an Akdama, a beautiful Akdama. He says, because in Parak Egla Arufa, appropriately in the end of Sota, it says, Mishameis Rebbe Batal Kavod HaTorah. When Rebbe died, Batal Kavod HaTorah. Why? What did Rabbi Akiva? Why? What did Rabbi Akiva do that was so special? Because Rabbi Akiva darshaned every single time there was a crown on a letter. He darshaned, why does that letter have a crown over here? And expressing the beauty of Torah, no matter where it is, that's an expression of Kavod HaTorah. And when Rebbe passed away, that extra aspect of Kavod HaTorah died with him. And then he quotes the Sefer Hasidim that there's certain mitzvahs that nobody writes about. And they're like a mace mitzvah. Nobody's being osik in it. Nobody's dealing with it. So he said to himself, that's Kavod HaTorah. I have to go and write on these types of things. And I want to just share with you that this also has to do with his amazing breadth of knowledge. Kavod HaTorah. There's a sefer, as I mentioned, Time of the Kra. In Time of the Kra in Parshas Kiseitze, Reb Chaim has an interesting question. You know that there's sometimes we see this by the name Simcha. Is Simcha a boy's name or it's a girl's name? Yonah, is it a boy's name or is it a girl's name? So there's a question about those types of names, if you're allowed to use them for a boy and for a girl, and vice versa. What do you do? So in time of the Krah, he has 79 rayas. Why you're allowed to name a boy Simcha and possibly a girl Simcha. 79 rayas. Why isn't 2 rayas, 3 rayas good enough? Why do you have 79? Because that's Kavod Torah. The Torah that describes the beauty of our Torah. I want to give one example that will blow your mind away. And again, we're not talking about, I wasn't able to photocopy, so I'm just getting the marmoko. We're not talking about somebody that had a computer. The pasuk in Parshas Kisei says, "V'kasav lo sefer krisus," that if a man and a woman unfortunately have to come to a divorce, you have to write a sefer krisus that will separate them. Chaim asks, why is a sefer krisus called a get? Why is a divorce document called a get? Why? So he quotes the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says that the only 2 letters in the Torah that are never next to each other are a gimel and a tes. And therefore that's an expression of separation. That's why it's specifically called a get. But it's not done yet. Chaim, again, this is not through any type of computer. He writes, and I have a problem with that. Why? The Gam Osios Gimel Kuf, Zayin Tes, Zayin Tzadi, Samach Tzadi, Lo Matzu. They were also not found next to each other. So what's the pshat? How could the Vilna Gaon say that? Think about what that means. He wasn't doing a computer search in his brain. What was he lived Torah. He knew that. It was on his fingertips. He loved it. And it's because he was consistent about what he did. He has an answer. He does answer that get is the first of the alphabet. Gimel Tes is the first of those few examples. But that's a little bit about just a glimpse of who he was. His time, as we mentioned, he said bracha v'atzlacha as his bracha. Rabbi Zilberstein Shlita, Reb Chaim's brother-in-law, said at the Levaya that at the end of his days, and the end of his life, in the past 7 or 8 years, maybe even 10 years, he said, instead of saying bracha v'atzlacha, he said bua, which is beis vav hey, and you just pronunciate bua. Instead, it was easier to say, it was quicker to say. But think about it just for a moment. Let's say he accepted people for brachos for 2 hours. Somebody shared with me that Rabbi Heinemann in Baltimore said the following cheshbon. He said that the amount of time that you would save by saying bracha v'atzlacha more than bua is 1 minute and 40 seconds. I did not do the math. Rabbi Heinemann did the math. But imagine what that means. What could you do in a minute and a half? I could do a lot of things. But what could Reb Chaim do in a minute and a half? He can do a lot of things too. Time is precious. They say a story about Rabbi Yosef that there was a light bulb that needed to be changed in the house, and his wife told him that could you please change the light bulb? So he said, well, we'll pay the handyman. He was going to learn to pay the handyman. So his wife says, do you know how much that costs? He said, pay the handyman, just do it. So he says, with money I can buy time. If that's what's money. Money is for buying time. Reb Chaim knew the value of time. They say a story, it's now very well known, that when the Stipler passed away, for the first year after he passed away, Reb Chaim gave a shir, Talmud Yerushalmi. But after the year was over, he stopped because he said it was just getting too much for him. He said that they asked Reb Chaim, he said, how long do you prepare for it? He said, 5 minutes. Well, those are 5 minutes that I need. Chaim's chesed. Just give you a little bit of a glimpse about what Chaim's chesed is. First, I want to start off with a story about not just his chesed to others, but chesed to his family, his parents. Listening to his parents, give it up b'ayim. When he was learning Kol Chazon Ish, so he had a regular seder. He left to after he davened Masikni. He had his own seder. Then he davened Masikni. Came back home, and he ate something. And then he left at 9, and then he came back at 1. And then he went back again to Kol HaFor, and then he came back at around 6 something to daven mincha and Mariv during the appropriate times. So one day in the 50s, Reb Chaim comes running at 11 o'clock in the morning into the house, which is unheard of because Reb Chaim went to Kollel 9, he came back at 1. He came running into the house, went straight to, he waved to Rabbi Kanievsky, went straight to his bed and lied down, and the Rebbe was astounded. Something must have happened. He didn't want to disturb my husband, he has reasons. About an hour later, the stipler himself, Reb Chaim's father, comes knocking at the door. Says, is Reb Chaim here? Is my Chaim here? So the Rebbe says, yes, is everything okay? He's like, I knew he would be here, but I made such a mistake. It's like, what's the mistake? He's like, I was giving shir in Nevardik Yeshiva in Beis Yosef down the block, and somebody told me that Chaim has a terrible back pains. So I said, tell Chaim he must go into bed now and rest. He can't be in Kollel. So the person went to Reb Chaim and says, your father said to go into bed right now. So Reb Chaim went into bed, and he was in bed in the park. That's why he came running. But the stipler said, there's one problem. He said, they got the wrong Reb Chaim. They meant Reb Chaim Greineman, my nephew, and I thought they meant Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So I came to wake him up and we walked back to Kollel. No questions asked from Reb Chaim. That's what the Tati said. It's kibbut avayim. That's it. No questions asked. It's a Maisa that I heard over Shabbos. Unbelievable Maisa. That on the days in preparation for Sukkot, I happen to have this problem. I can never find a lulav. I have a hard time finding a lulav. Now with dairy, it makes it a little bit easier, but I always had a hard time finding a lulav. So there was a young bacher who followed Reb Chaim Kanievsky the days preceding Sukkot that he wanted to see, Reb Chaim buy a lulav. So he walks into a store and he sees that Reb Chaim picks up one lulav, puts it down, second lulav, looks at it, puts it down, the third lulav, he goes and buys it. So he went to Reb Chaim's son who was with him. He says, I'm so mekana Reb Chaim, it takes so long for me to buy a lulav, and Reb Chaim just buys it in 5 minutes. He says, hold on a second. Come to the house. Go to the house, go upstairs, and they see on the dining room table about 30 lulavim. Like, what's going on over here? He says, well, when my father walks into a store, he picks up a lulav, puts it down, picks it up, put it down. He's like, how would it look to the store owner if Reb Chaim Kanievsky walks out of the store without a lulav? They'll think that this store, there's nothing good in this store, so no one's going to buy from it. So Chaim was thinking about others. He was thinking about the chesed. What can I make sure that this person is going to be able to still have a parnasa? In 2012, there was a letter that was published by Reb Chaim that reaffirmed what he said during the Gulf War. What did they say during the Gulf War? In 1991, when the Americans invaded Kuwait, one of the things that Saddam Hussein, Yimach Shemo, said was that if you invade Kuwait and Iraq, so we're going to shoot Scud missiles at Eretz Yisrael. What does that have to do with that? Don't know, but that's what he said. At the time, people were very nervous, especially because they were always aimed at Tel Aviv. So Bnei Brak is right by Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, and people were scared. So Reb Chaim knew that, and he made a proclamation. He says, anybody that's scared should come to Bnei Brak. And if you're still scared, come to my house. Open house, come to my porch, or sleep in my house. No problem. Why? Chazon Ish said, my Rebbe said that there will never be a bomb that will be exploding in Bnei Brak, and there will never be a missile. So in 2012, when there were rockets being shot from Gaza, so Reb Chaim wrote a letter. Anybody that's scared, please come to my house. Bnei Brak will not get touched. He cared about people. He wanted to make people at ease. That's part of the chesed, is not just thinking about something that comes to you, but thinking about what would other people think, or little kids think, people that can't even ask. It calms you down. He cared about that. He once was visited by somebody that said, I'm about to have a court case. Can I get a bracha from the Rav? So Chaim asked him, said, what's the court case about? He said, well, I was caught driving without a license. So he turns red in the face and he says, you're Rotseach. He says, you drive against the rules? He says, you don't care about the other person. You don't care about somebody else. How can you do that? He refused to give him a bracha. The person was persistent. I want the bracha, I want the bracha. So he says, you should get what's coming to you. Whether he won the case, I don't know. In 1948, he was learning in Petach Tikva in the Lamji Yeshiva during the Independence War. And the Haganah came in. They asked, will you help defend the country? And Reb Chaim said, yes. So they gave Reb Chaim an instrument of battle, which was a pitchfork. And they said, you're going to defend Eretz Yisrael with a pitchfork. So he went and he was I think even rifles were hard to come by. And he went and he was told where to go. It was right outside Yafo, and he saw that the Arabs weren't really fighting in that area. They were in Latrun at the time. They were on their way up to Yerushalayim. That's where the main battles were. And he saw that he wasn't really needed. So he went to the general or the person that was telling him where to go. He says, "You Chaim, you can go and say to him over the hill. Don't worry about it. That will protect us even more." But Chaim wanted to do his part. He cared. His son, Reb Shlomo Shlita, is a principal of a high school and an elementary school. High school, Kiryas Melech, and elementary school, Tiferes Tzion, that the Chazon Ish started. And he came to his father a number of years ago, and he says, I have many Bachrim in Yeshiva that have a hard time sitting and learning for a Seder, sitting and learning for such a long amount of time. What do I tell them? So Reb Chaim says, I have that problem too. Have a hard time looking at the clock. Because sometimes when we look at the clock, we're like, this will never end. Oh my gosh. So Reb Chaim said to him, tell your students, take 5 minutes at a time, because that's what I do. I take things 5 minutes at a time, 5 minutes at a time. You cannot be pressured to do things. Especially children. If children are pressured to do things, it's going to backfire. You have to figure out a way, and a mechanech has to figure out a way how to get children and even adults, how to get them to learn in a way where they don't feel that pressure. Sometimes you need it. But when a child is, or a bacher has that, the best thing to help him out is to ease off on the pressure. As Rabbi Summers mentioned, I wrote to him letters. I wrote letters from 2003 to 2008, almost once a week. Did I get comments in yeshiva by writing the letters? Yes, I got comments in yeshiva by writing the letters. But I'll tell you why I did it. I did it because I wanted to be close to a gadol. I was in Eretz Yisrael for 2 years. I heard about Reb Chaim. Didn't really get a chance to know him that well. I saw some of his svarim. But I was told by a good friend of mine that if you write him a letter, he'll answer you. So I decided to start writing letters. I remember one time I wrote so many questions to him on one letter. He said to me, Lo uchal la'anot al elef sheilot. I can't answer 1,000 questions. But then he ended off by saying, Kishetia im Eretz Hashem be'eretz Yisrael tikanes. Come inside. And I remember asking my Mashiach, Rabbi Naiman Zatzal, should I continue or not? He said, for sure continue. But I wrote him an apology letter. I said, I'm not going to write so many questions on one letter. Why did he answer everybody? So, I asked him that question. Why did he answer everybody? I didn't get a response. I got a Kishetia Emeretz Hashem Be'eretz Yisrael Tikanes. But I asked a Talmud of his, and I have it in my house in a folder, in a sefer actually. Could you please ask Reb Chaim, why does he answer so many letters? It takes so much time. And as I mentioned earlier, his Seder, what he was doing, it was so hard for him. Why did he answer? So he said 2 things. He says, number one, it's a chesed. It's a chesed for others. And he added, I don't know if this is what Reb Chaim said or this person, added to me. He said, who knows if Hashem is giving him the life because, he wrote Chaim in quotation marks, because of this chesed. It cheers people up. And somebody in New York that wants to send him his Mishnah Berurah questions or his questions of, what happens if this happens, it gives a person chizuk. I can tell that. It gave me chizuk. He said, but that's not the only thing. He said that he never had a yeshiva. He never had a yeshiva. His father told him not to have yeshiva. In fact, there was a story that he was learning in yeshiva in Kol, I believe it was either in Kol Chazanish or Tiferes Zion. I think it was in Kol Chazanish, and he was asked to go and sub in Tiferes Zion, elementary school. So he said, sure. He said he started the Mishnah, and he said after about 2 minutes, the Bacher raised his hand and said, can I use the restroom? 3 minutes later, he realizes that 16 boys also raised their hand, and he also gave them permission to use the restroom. And about 3 minutes after that, he saw there was only one boy left. And he looks at him, says, you're a Baal Chesed, but I'm sure you also have to use the restroom, so come, let's go. And he closed the Gemara. He says, that's why, he said, my father told me I'm not a Mechanech, I'm not a Rosh Hashiva. But he had Talmidim. He said, I have Talmidim because of the letters. I wrote Sfarim, but that's Harbatz Torah. That's not Talmidim. Talmidim is a connection. He was so careful, even when in 2001 and 2005, when he had a stroke, he couldn't write. He had his son Ritzel Shol respond in his father's lashon, in the father's words. He said, "This is the words of my father, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky." I have those letters. I'm just going to close with two final thoughts. His father, the Stipler, always davened for him, for the Hez Hatzlacha. You can think to yourself, as sometimes we do, our son got into this elementary school, our son got into this camp, our daughter got into this Beis Yaakov. Okay, we can stop davening for them. They got this shidduch. Okay, they're set. The Stipler Ad Sof Yama, the Stipler, who was in his high 80s, he passed away when he was 87 years old, davened every day for the hatzlacha of his son, Chaim. Tefillah makes a difference. Tefillahs of parents to children make a difference. You have to be mispalel for our children. He was the gem of the family. Chazon Ish wrote about him that he was Mara Dechula Talmuda, that when he was a bacher, he knew God's Shas. What does that mean? He was a master of Shas. They knew that about him, but still they davened for him. His father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef, was Nispal when he wrote a sefer, Shekel HaKodesh, on Kiddush HaKodesh. The tapestry of knowledge and mathematical astronomy was astounding. Rabbi Yosef himself, the giant Rabbi Yosef, said that I have Chalish Sadas, that I am this spoil. I'm amazed by what Rabbi Chaim was able to accomplish. That was partially through the tefillah and siyata d'shmaya, the tefillah of a father to his son. I believe I heard this explanation of a Gemara that I'm about to mention at the first or the second Yartzeit gathering of my Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Hanach Liebowitz Zatzal, from Rabbi Luban, Shlita. Quoted the Gemara in the end of Sota. It says, Mishemes Rebbe Batla Anava V'Yaraschet. That's what the Brisa says. When Rabbi died, so Anava and Yiraschet went with it. So Gemara end of Sota says, Amar le Rav Yosef. Says, Lo tisni Anava, Dika Ana. Don't write Anava, because there's still me. I'm an Anav. Don't say that Batla Anava, there's still me. Okay. Obvious question is, if you're such an Anav, why are you saying with a big banner, oh, there's still me, I'm an Anav, don't say Mishemes Rebbe, Batla Anava, because I'm also an Anav. That doesn't sound so anivistic. Doesn't sound so humble. So there are many answers to this question. Rabbi Luban said over from the name of Rav Zaychik Zatzal, said as follows. So when a Rebbe has a Mesorah, when a Rebbe is teaching something to Talmidim or Klal Yisrael, if his message doesn't get through, there's something wrong with the Rebbe. So when the Brisa said, when the Tana said, when Rebbe died, Batla Anava, that means that Rebbe wasn't successful in giving over his Torah because people aren't humble anymore. So there was something lacking in Rebbe. Rabbi Yosef says, no, there was nothing lacking in my Rebbe because I'm still an Anna. When a Rebbe is able to pass on to the next generation, that's Hatzlacha. So at the end of tonight, I'm not going to give you any suggestions about what to do. You heard a lot about Rabbi Chaim. I'm sure you read a lot about Rabbi Chaim. But one thing I'm going to ask for everybody here to think about is that Rabbi Chaim passed away. Mishemeis Rabbi Chaim, we should not say batla on anything that he did. We should take upon something. What is it? That's a personal thing. But we should not leave here without thinking, at least for a few moments, what could we do possibly to make it that it's not batal? B'schus that, in Mitzvah Hashem, we should all be able to be zocha. It's the months of Nisan. We should all be able to be zocha in Mitzvah Hashem to bring the Korban Pesach together in Yerushalayim. Amen. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have send His Rachmanos on all of Klal Yisrael. We should see the Binyan Abayis Meher V'Yameinu. Amen.
Rabbi Bondi, I'm sure everyone was inspired by your amazing words and your personal recollections. Chazal say that at Rebbe's Levaya, the people who came took a lot to come. It was on Erev Shabbos, but there was Zocha. Baskol came out and said there's Zocha to Chai Olam Haba, every single one of them. So we hope that by all of us coming out, and some people don't like coming out today, they want to sit at home and watch on Zoom. So we B'davka didn't have it on Zoom today. So it's a special schus for people to go out of their way and come. Rabbi Chaim should be a man with Yosef for us. So many tzaras and so many things that his brachas are still needed for. And Meretz Hashem, if we take Rabbi Bondi's, as long as in his words, learn from him and maybe take upon ourselves, do something to emulate him, Meretz Hashem, we should be Zocha today. He should be a Melech Yosef for us. I'd like to just take a moment to thank Aaron Gross for his amazing flyer and also for recording tonight and putting it on the website. Also, I'd like to thank Shua Richards, who is not here tonight, but he does so much work as our e-Gabbai. I'd like to thank Jeffrey Silverman, for the PA, for the microphone and all this help. Everyone should share in Simchas.